после
to
голосования.
make a statement after
Я
the vote,
предоставляю слово
and I give the
представителю
floor
Соединенного
to the
Королевства.
representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. UNMAHA plays an important role in maintaining critical commercial and humanitarian routes into the ports of Hodeidah, Salif and Ras Isa, including supporting demilitarisation of the ports. We thank the Council for the show of unity in the adoption of a 12-month mandate renewal. This sends a clear message on the continued importance of the ceasefire in Hodeidah and the work to preserve it. However, we are clear that the continued Houthi restrictions on the movement of the mission and the proliferation of weapons in Hodeidah must end. The UK is committed to securing a sustainable peace and long-term stability for Yemen, including by supporting the UN-led process to achieve an inclusive political settlement. Thank you.
Я благодарю
I
представителя
thank the
Соединенного
representative of the
Королевства и
United
предоставляю
Kingdom, and I now
слово
give the
представителю
floor
Соединенных
to the
Штатов.
representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the United Kingdom for bringing forward a resolution to renew UNMAHA's mandate for an additional 12 months. This resolution allows UNMAHA to continue patrols of Red Sea ports and coordinate with the stakeholders of the Stockholm Agreement. The resolution may also allow the expansion of monitoring of conflict-affected and frontline districts in the Hodeidah Governorate. The Houthis' wanton attacks on international shipping and blatant disregard for this Council's demand that they cease those attacks affirm the need for UNMAHA's work to continue. We must continue our efforts to implement Resolution 2722, demanding the Houthis cease their attacks. We all must also do more to underscore the Council's concern regarding the Iranian origin of weapons used by the Houthis and the ongoing violations. While Iran denies these violations, its own state-affiliated media has touted the country's supply of prohibited ballistic missile technology to the Houthis, something UN experts have concluded as well and published in their reports. So we repeat our call for Iran to stop these illegal weapons transfers and stop all activities that facilitate and directly enable the Houthis' reckless attacks. Ongoing violations should not be tolerated. Violators should be designated by the Security Council, and we should strengthen existing mechanisms and authorities to address the provision of weapons to the Houthis and the corresponding escalating violence in the Red Sea. UNMAHA's renewal is one part of our continued efforts to hold the Houthis and their foreign patrons accountable. Finally, the United States remains deeply disturbed that Houthi rebels continue to detain at least 45 Yemeni employees of UN agencies, member state diplomatic missions, private companies, international organizations, and non-governmental organizations. The detention of UN and NGO staff directly and negatively affects the ability of these organizations to provide humanitarian aid. We all must speak together to condemn these detentions and call for the Houthis to release these detainees immediately. Thank you.
Я благодарю представителя
Thank the
Соединенных Штатов.
representative of the United
Список
States.
ораторов
There are
исчерпан.
no more
Заседание
names inscribed
объявляется
on the
закрытым.
list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
major calamity. The button has gone broken, but the sound was there. I assure you. 9681 заседание Совета Безопасности объявляется открытым. Предварительная повестка дня данного заседания гласит: ситуация в отношении Демократической Республики Конго. Повестка дня утверждается. На основании правила 37 временных правил процедуры Совета я приглашаю принять участие в данном заседании представителей Демократической Республики Конго и Руанды. Решение принимается. На основании правила 39 временных правил процедуры Совета я приглашаю принять участие в заседании специального представителя Генерального секретаря и главу миссии Организации Объединенных Наций по стабилизации Демократической Республики Конго, госпожу Бинту Кейта. Решение принимается. Совет Безопасности приступает к рассмотрению пункта 2 повестки. Я хотел бы обратить внимание членов Совета на документ С-24-482, доклад Генерального секретаря о миссии Организации Объединенных Наций по стабилизации Демократической
in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as document S/2024/519, a letter dated 28 June 2024 from the Secretary General addressed to the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to Ms. Bintu Keita.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, unfortunately, the speaker's microphone is not working properly. Thank you for this opportunity to present the report of the Secretary General on the
Je salue également la présence de son Excellence, Monsieur le représentant permanent de la RDC à New York, Zénon Mukongo, et de son Excellence, Monsieur le représentant permanent de la République du Rwanda, Ernest Rwamucyo. Depuis mon dernier briefing, le 27 mars 2024, les dynamiques politiques se sont surtout concentrées sur la mise en place du nouveau gouvernement qui a été inauguré pendant la nuit du 11 au 12 juin 2024, faisant suite aux élections de décembre 2023. Je salue chaleureusement la nomination de la première première ministre dans l'histoire du pays, Madame Judith Suminwa-Tuluka. Le nouveau gouvernement compte, au-delà de la première ministre, 17 femmes sur les 54 ministres, ce qui représente une nette augmentation de 27 à 33%. De représentation féminine et témoigne de l'engagement du chef de l'État à promouvoir l'égalité des sexes en RDC et de ses efforts en sa qualité de champion de la masculinité positive de l'Union africaine. Depuis la prise de fonction du nouveau gouvernement et du bureau de l'Assemblée nationale, j'ai eu l'occasion de m'entretenir avec la Première ministre, plusieurs ministres et le président de l'Assemblée nationale. Lors de ces échanges, nous avons pu discuter du nouveau plan d'action du gouvernement et des possibilités de soutien de la MONUSCO à travers sa mise en œuvre conformément à son mandat. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, just a few days before the election of the Permanent Bureau of the National Assembly on 19 May, armed elements attacked the residence of Vital Kamerhe, leading to the death of 2 policemen in charge of his security. The attackers subsequently breached the premises of the Palais de la Nation. Order was quickly restored, with the Congolese security forces arresting over 50 individuals subsequently charged with participating in the attacks. I condemn in the strongest terms this attempt to destabilize national institutions. The security situation in eastern DRC has continued to deteriorate, reaching alarming levels of violence and civilian displacement. I am extremely concerned about the rapid expansion of the movement du 23 Mars M23 in North Kivu and the spillover in South Kivu, despite numerous operations conducted by the FRDC, regularly supported by MONUSCO and SAMI-DRC. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, the M23 captured several strategic locations in North Kivu, including the town of Kanyabayonga, straddling the Lubero and Rutshuru territories. During their latest military offensive, the M23 and its backers burned several FRDC bases and triggered additional population displacement, further exacerbating an already catastrophic humanitarian and human rights situation. As documented by the group of experts, which reports to the Sanction Committee established by this Council, the government of Rwanda has reinforced its support to the M23, enabling it to make major territorial gains across eastern DRC. The rapidly escalating M23 crisis carries the risk, the very real risk of provoking a wider regional conflict. In addition to the escalating M23 crisis, a spate of horrific attacks carried out by the ADF, Zaire and Codeco armed groups in Ituri province has caused almost 300 additional victims during the reporting period. Further south, the ADF have also entered Lubero territory in North Kivu on several occasions, killing an unprecedented number of civilians. Between 4 and 7 June alone, more than 90 people were killed in isolated corners of the territory. In South Kivu, the M23 crisis also reached Kalehe territory, with indirect fire hitting Minova and other nearby towns, killing and injuring several civilians and generating further displacement. In the southern part of the province, rumors of M23 infiltration of the Haut Plateau of Uvira, Fizi, and Mwenga have further exacerbated community tensions, which require the urgent attention of government authorities. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, dans ce contexte complexe, la MONUSCO a poursuivi son soutien aux opérations militaires des FARDC. Les opérations conjointes ont pu contribuer à la protection des civils, surtout en ce qui concerne les opérations contre Codeco et des groupes Maï-Maï en Ituri. La MONUSCO a également formé 500 nouvelles recrues FARDC dans le cadre d'une nouvelle opération conjointe FARDC
joint FARDC MONUSCO operation called Northern Scalpel. The Springbok operation in defense of Goma and Sake has continued to confront operations of the M23 and is continuing.
La SAMI-DRC a continué son déploiement et devrait atteindre sa pleine capacité opérationnelle d'ici mi-juillet. Je voudrais, à cette occasion, exprimer mes profondes condoléances à l'Afrique du Sud qui a perdu 2 soldats le 25 juin lors d'une attaque au mortier du M23 contre sa base à Sake. Je souhaite également un prompt rétablissement aux blessés. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, we are witnessing in the DRC one of the most severe, complex, and neglected humanitarian crises of our times. The escalating violence in the East continues to trigger massive population displacement, exacerbating an already dreadful humanitarian situation. Overall, the DRC today counts 7.3 million displaced people, including 6.9 million in the eastern provinces alone. International humanitarian law violations are impeding humanitarian aid delivery. The growing proximity of the front lines and the presence of weapons, including heavy artillery, within and around displacement camps and spontaneous sites significantly compromise the security of the displaced and resident population. At least 15 bombardments have hit IDP sites or their immediate surroundings, killing almost 30 people and injuring many more. What is sadly more is that gender-based violence does not stop to increase. For the whole year of 23, 122,960 cases of gender-based violence were reported, marking a 3% increase from 22. Female victims, including girls, accounted for almost 90% of all cases, with incidents of sexual violence against children increasing by 40%. This is solely the tip of the iceberg, as many cases remain unreported. Based on current trends, 24 risk becoming another, sadly, record year. The 2024 Humanitarian Response Plan, launched on 20th February 2024, seeks for $2.6 billion to provide humanitarian assistance to 8.7 million crisis-affected people. As of mid-June, the plan remained only funded at 26%. I thank Member States for their support and encourage them to provide additional support. In addition, I also call upon Member States and regional organizations to increase their efforts to reduce humanitarian suffering by strengthening their engagement towards political and regional solutions and by recommitting to tackle the root causes of conflict driving the dramatic upsurge of humanitarian needs. I welcome the 2 weeks humanitarian truce in Eastern DRC, which began at midnight on July 5th. I urge the parties to use this as an opportunity to inject fresh momentum into ongoing regional peace efforts. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, comme sollicité dans la résolution 2717-2023, le secrétaire général vous a soumis une lettre identifiant les différentes options possibles de soutien à la SAMI-DRC, dont le mandat a été endossé par le Conseil de paix et de sécurité de l'Union africaine en mars. Je ne reviendrai pas sur les options qui vous ont été présentées, mais voudrais rappeler, comme mentionné dans la lettre, qu'il n'y aura pas de solution militaire à ce conflit et que la paix ne pourra être rétablie que grâce à des solutions politiques durables. J'exprime donc ma gratitude et mon plein soutien aux efforts continus de médiation menés par le président angolais João Lourenço entre la RDC et le Rwanda dans le cadre du processus de Luanda. Ceci qui nécessite le plein soutien de la communauté internationale. Je salue à cet égard la tenue prochaine d'une réunion ministérielle du Conseil de paix et de sécurité de l'Union africaine à l'initiative de l'Angola pour discuter de la situation à l'Est. Ces efforts régionaux doivent être menés en complémentarité avec les initiatives de médiation au niveau provincial et local destinées à faciliter le désarmement des groupes armés dans l'esprit du processus. Dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre de son mandat, la MONUSCO a continué à appuyer les efforts de désarmement, démobilisation et réintégration du gouvernement, notamment en Ituri et dans certaines provinces du Nord Kivu, ainsi que ceux liés à la réforme du secteur de sécurité. À Lubero, au Nord Kivu, un projet de réinsertion a bénéficié plus de 1800 ex-combattants. Dans le cadre de la réforme du secteur de sécurité, la mission a appuyé la mise en place d'une entité nationale chargée de la coordination de la réforme du secteur de sécurité sous l'égide du conseiller spécial du président de la République. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, le 25 juin, la Première ministre Judith Suminwa Tuluka et moi-même avons présidé la cérémonie de clôture des opérations de la MONUSCO au Sud Kivu, mettant fin à
chaired
plus de
the
20 ans
closing
d'opérations dans la
ceremony
province.
of the operations
Comme
of
vous avez
MONUSCO
pu
in
le
South
lire dans le
Kivu,
rapport
putting an
conjoint
end to
soumis
20
à
years
votre
of
Conseil,
operations in the
le
province.
désengagement du
As
Sud
you were
Kivu
able
s'est
to read in
déroulé
the
dans les
joint
délais
report
grâce à
submitted
une
to your
franche
council, the
collaboration entre
disengagement in
les
South
autorités
Kivu
congolaises et la
took
mission,
place within
en
the
traitant
established time frame
courageusement les
thanks to
défis
close
sécuritaires
cooperation
et
between the
logistiques
Congolese authorities
identifiés
and the mission
conjointement.
by
Je remercie
courageously
les autorités
tackling the
congolaises pour
security
leur
and logistical
flexibilité et
challenges
pragmatisme
jointly
tout au long du
identified. I thank the
processus.
Congolese
Le
authorities for their
rapport conjoint
flexibility and
d'évaluation du
pragmatism throughout this
désengagement
process.
nous a
The
permis de
joint
tirer les
evaluation
leçons
report on the
importantes de ce
disengagement
processus
has made it
qui seront
possible for us
très
to draw
utiles à la
important lessons from
planification
this process, which
conjointe
will be
de ces
very
prochaines
useful
phases.
to the joint
En
planning
parallèle,
of its next phases.
le processus
In
de
parallel,
transition se
the
poursuit.
process of transition is
Une
continuing.
feuille de route,
A
c'est-à-dire un
roadmap
plan
that
provincial
is
de
a
transition
provincial
pour la
transition
province
plan
du
for the
Sud
province
Kivu,
of South
accompagné
Kivu,
par un plan
together
d'appui
with
de
a
l'équipe pays des
support
Nations
plan of the
Unies,
UN
ont été
country team have
finalisés.
been finalized.
Ils identifient les
These plans
priorités, les
identify
ressources
priorities,
existantes et les
available
besoins à venir.
resources, and future
J'encourage les
needs.
États membres
I
à
encourage
appuyer
member
pleinement
states
cette
to fully
transition,
support
y
this
compris
transition,
financièrement,
including
pour que celle-ci
financially,
se passe en
so
douceur.
that it
Je
goes
tiens
smoothly.
également à
I would
souligner le
also
rôle
like to
important
underscore the
joué
important
par le
role
Fonds de
played by the
consolidation de la paix
Peace
dans le
Building
cadre de cette
Fund
transition.
in the framework
Dans
of
le
this
contexte
transition.
du
In the
désengagement et de
context
la
of the
transition,
disengagement and transition,
l'accélération du
the acceleration of
PDDRCS nécessitera une volonté décisive
PDDRCS
de
will
la part des
require
autorités à
decisive
convaincre les groupes armés
determination
de la
on
nécessité
the
du
part of the
désarmement,
authorities to
en
convince the
commençant par
armed
les
groups of
provinces
the
du
need for
Tanganyika, du Sud
disarmament,
Kivu, du
starting with the
Maniema et de
provinces of
l'Ituri,
Tanganyika,
et en
South
attendant
Kivu,
la fin
Maniema,
du
and
conflit au
Ituri,
Nord
and until
Kivu,
the
ainsi
end of
qu'un
the
engagement
conflict
à plus
in
long
North
terme des
Kivu, as well as
partenaires
a
internationaux de la
long-term
RDC.
commitment by the
De
international
son
partners
côté,
of the
le
DRC.
système des Nations Unies reste
The
pleinement
UN system,
engagé
for its
auprès
part,
des autorités
will
pour
continue
assurer
to
un
work
soutien
closely with the
technique et
authorities to ensure
opérationnel
a
au
technical and operational
PDDRCS.
support
Monsieur le
for the
Président, distingués membres du Conseil,
PDDRCS. Mr.
pour
President,
conclure,
distinguished members of the
j'aimerais
Council, to
partager
conclude,
avec
I would
vous
like to
un
share
extrait
with
d'un
you an
slam qui a été
extract
préparé
of a
par
poem
les jeunes de
written
Uhuru
by
Knowledge
the
Center
young
et qui
people of
exprime
Uhuru
tristement
Knowledge Center,
les
in which
périls des jeunes du
expresses
Nord
very
Kivu et
sadly
témoigne
the
de
perils of being
l'urgence
young
du
in
soutien
North
d'action
Kivu and bears
nationale
witness to the
et
urgency
internationale.
of both national and international support.
Vivre dans des conditions
To live in
inhumaines, marcher
inhumane
des
conditions,
kilomètres,
walking
en
endless
quête de paix, mais
kilometers,
à
on a
chaque
quest
repos,
for
c'est
peace,
toujours
but
la
at each
guerre
halt,
qui règne
it's
en
war
maître.
that reigns
Un
supreme.
cycle infernal
An
de
infernal
fuite et les
cycle
bombes
of
sur les
fleeing
déplacés à
and
Mugunga
bombs falling on the
après tous ces
IDPs of
trajets.
Mugunga after this
Traumatisme
constant
et peur
fleeing. Trauma
devenus nos
and
compagnons.
fear have become
Les
our
villages
daily
brûlés,
companions.
les maisons
Villages
incendiées,
burned,
les cœurs des
houses
familles
set on
brisées,
fire,
à
the hearts of
Kishishe, à
entire
Bambo,
families
à
shattered in
Kishanga, à
Kishishe, in
Rubaya,
Bomba, in
à
Kichanga,
Kiroche,
in Rubaya,
à
in
Mugunga.
Kirochi, and
La colère
Mugunga.
ne fait qu'exploser.
Anger is
Plus le
boiling
temps
over.
passe,
The more
on
time
vit dans
passes,
l'impasse et
the more
l'esprit
the
de
impasse
violence.
and the rhythm of
Alors que
violence
c'est au
settles in,
rythme
while
de
we would
justice,
actually
de
prefer to
paix
dance
et
to
de
the beat of
réconciliation
justice,
qu'on
peace,
veut
and
danser ici.
reconciliation.
Ils doivent retrouver leur village,
Millions
ces
of
millions
children
d'enfants
must
en
return to their
soif de
villages
rejoindre leur
as they
salle de
thirst
classe,
to return to their
zénopes du
classrooms.
futur, que ces
Xenopes
enfants
of the
soient
future,
sauvés.
may these children be
Nous
saved.
devons d'écouter cette jeunesse
We have a
congolaise
duty
et de
to
la
listen
soutenir
to this Congolese
sans réserve
youth and
pour
to
l'avenir du
support it
pays. Je
wholeheartedly
vous
for the
remercie
future of the
de
country.
votre
Thank you
aimable
for your
attention.
kind attention.
Я благодарю госпожу Кита за
I
ее
thank
брифинг.
Ms.
Сейчас я
Kita for her
предоставляю
briefing. I
слово
now
членам
give the floor
Совета,
to those
желающим
council
выступить
members
с
who
заявлениями.
wish to
И
make
я
statements,
предоставляю
and I
слово
give the
представителю
floor
Франции.
to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
je remercie
I
Madame
thank
Keïta pour son
Ms.
intervention
Keïta
et je
for her
tiens à lui
briefing,
redire le plein soutien de
and
la
I
France.
reiterate to her the
J'insisterai
full
sur
support
plusieurs
of
points.
France. I would like to emphasize
La
several
France
points.
est très préoccupée par
France
l'escalade
is
en
gravely
cours
concerned by the
dans l'Est de
current
la République
escalation
démocratique du
in the
Congo.
east of the
Ces violences
DRC.
alimentent
This
la
violence
crise
is
et les
fueling
violations du droit
the crisis and
international.
violations of international
La France
law.
condamne le bombardement
France
du camp
condemns
de
the
déplacés de
bombing of the
Mugunga le
Mugunga
3 mai
IDP
dernier
camp on
et elle
May
demande que
3rd
toute la vérité soit
and
faite sur
demands
cet
that
incident.
the
Elle
full
condamne
truth be
également les
established
attaques qui ont
regarding this
causé la mort de
incident. We
personnels
also condemn the
humanitaires le
attacks
1er
which
juillet.
led to the death of
La France
humanitarian
salue
personnel on July
l'annonce,
1st.
le 4 juillet d'une trêve de 2 semaines entre les belligérants. Celle-ci doit ouvrir la voie à une reprise du dialogue en vue d'un règlement dans le cadre du processus de Luanda. L'ensemble des parties doivent agir en ce sens. La France soutient les efforts du président de l'Angola. Cette trêve doit aussi permettre un accès humanitaire complet. La France condamne l'action des groupes armés dans l'est de la RDC, dont le M23,
actions of all armed groups in the east of the DRC, including the M23, which has continued its offensive since the beginning of the year and extended its control towards the north of North Kivu province. France denounces the pressure exerted by the M23 on MONUSCO in order to take control of certain areas.
Pour 2024 du panel d'experts a mis en lumière les liens entretenus par plusieurs groupes armés avec des acteurs étatiques. La France condamne la violation de la souveraineté et de l'intégrité
DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity,
le soutien militaire du
Rwanda's
Rwanda
military
au M23,
support for the
ainsi que la
M23,
présence de plus en plus importante des forces militaires rwandaises sur le territoire congolais. Ces agissements doivent cesser. Il importe que la République démocratique du Congo, de son côté, mette un terme aux liens entre les forces armées, ses forces armées et les FDLR, et nous saluons son engagement à démobiliser les combattants
demobilize this group's
La France salue le déploiement
France
de la
welcomes the deployment
SAMI-RDC.
of SAMI-DRC.
Elle a pris note des recommandations du secrétaire général pour renforcer la coopération entre la MONUSCO et cette force régionale. Un projet de texte sera présenté prochainement aux membres du Conseil de sécurité à cette fin par ma délégation. La France demande par ailleurs aux forces régionales de renforcer leur coordination avec la MONUSCO. Elle salue le travail du groupe d'experts établi par la résolution 1533, ainsi que le renouvellement du régime de sanctions. Elle rappelle que l'embargo sur les armes en République démocratique du Congo ne vise que les groupes armés et qu'il ne concerne plus les autorités congolaises ou les forces régionales partenaires. La MONUSCO continue de jouer un rôle clé. Le rapport conjoint des Nations Unies et des autorités congolaises est clair sur les défis rencontrés lors du retrait du Sud-Kivu. Les conditions qui ont permis ce retrait ne sont pas encore réunies au Nord Kivu et en Ituri. La France salue la volonté du gouvernement congolais de consolider le transfert de responsabilité au Sud-Kivu avant d'avancer vers les prochaines étapes. Elle a pleinement confiance dans le gouvernement congolais pour poursuivre cette coopération avec les Nations Unies.
Я благодарю представителя Франции за заявление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Эквадора.
And I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señor presidente. Quiero agradecer a la representante especial del secretario general y jefa de la MONUSCO, señora Bintou Keita, por su exposición informativa. Reconozco también la presencia de los representantes de la República Democrática del Congo y de Ruanda en esta sesión y hacemos un respetuoso llamado a realizar de buena fe todos los esfuerzos necesarios para apoyar el encauzamiento hacia un diálogo constructivo. El nombramiento de la señora Judith Suminwa Tuluka como primera mujer en el cargo de primera ministra de la RDC es un hito histórico que debe resaltarse, ya que promueve la participación de las mujeres en posiciones de toma de decisiones. A ella se suman otras 17 mujeres como parte del gobierno, lo que debe continuar fortaleciéndose, ya que la representación de las mujeres en los niveles decisorios es un elemento esencial de las sociedades más inclusivas, seguras y pacíficas, y una muestra institucional y democrática del combate contra la violencia hacia las mujeres y otros grupos vulnerables. Señor presidente, es preocupante la violencia del M23 en Kivu del Norte y su expansión a partes de Kivu del Sur, que coincide con el proceso de retirada de la MONUSCO de dicha localidad. Esta situación confirma la necesidad de colaboración de la RDC con la MONUSCO en la implementación del plan de retirada de la misión como elemento de apoyo al control gubernamental en todo el territorio. Sobre el deterioro de la situación de seguridad, cabe recordar el claro mensaje del Consejo de Seguridad emitido el mes pasado en cuanto a que el apoyo militar extranjero al M23 y aquel proporcionado a determinados grupos armados como las FDLR deben cesar de inmediato. Ecuador reconoce los esfuerzos diplomáticos de mediación entre la RDC y Ruanda, liderados por el gobierno de Angola. Es plausible la firma del acuerdo de cese de hostilidades entre el gobierno y varios grupos armados en la provincia de Ituri, por lo que el Ecuador alienta al gobierno a continuar abordando las causas de las tensiones intercomunitarias y a implementar el acuerdo en el marco del programa de desarme, desmovilización, recuperación comunitaria y estabilización. Las prácticas más atroces de crímenes registrados en la RDC, entre ellos la violencia sexual basada en género y las graves violaciones contra los niños, no pueden quedar en la impunidad. En este contexto, destaco la labor de la MONUSCO en su compromiso para que cese el reclutamiento y utilización de niños en grupos armados y su labor en el fortalecimiento del sector judicial mediante la implementación del programa de apoyo de reforma judicial conjunta de las Naciones Unidas y la cooperación técnica y financiera para luchar contra la impunidad y crímenes de lesa humanidad. Señor Presidente, la situación humanitaria en la RDC sigue siendo crítica, con más de 7 millones de desplazados internos y cerca de 400.000 retornados del país en 2024, lo que convierte a esta crisis en una de las mayores del mundo, hecho que obliga a la comunidad internacional a responder en forma consecuente con esas apremiantes necesidades. En este contexto, damos la bienvenida a la tregua humanitaria que se ha acordado en el este de la RDC y que se ha logrado con los buenos oficios de los Estados Unidos y el apoyo de la RDC y de Ruanda. Hacemos un llamado a las partes a respetar este acuerdo. El Ecuador considera que el despliegue de la misión de la Comunidad de Desarrollo de África del Sur, que cuenta con el apoyo de la Unión Africana, es una muestra del apoyo regional para la paz y la estabilización de la RDC, lo que el Consejo de Seguridad debe apoyar, así como debe hacerlo con toda iniciativa regional, bilateral e internacional que, de manera coordinada, apoya a la RDC en la consolidación de la paz y estabilidad política. Finalmente, reiteramos que solo el diálogo y los medios pacíficos darán paso a la paz sostenible, por lo que los procesos de Nairobi y de Luanda deben continuar al haberse constituido en piezas clave en la arquitectura de paz de la región. Muchas gracias.
Я благодарю представителя Эквадора, и сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов.
Thank you, President. We welcome the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda to the Chamber. And I'd like to start by thanking the Special Representative for her hard work and that of her team under exceptionally challenging circumstances and for her briefing today. First, the United Kingdom is encouraged by the 2-week humanitarian truce that has been announced, particularly given the worrying recent intensification of violence in North Kivu, including the fall of Kunya Bayanga to the UN-sanctioned group M23. We call on all parties to the conflict to uphold the truce. We hope this will support the journey to lasting peace. We also welcome discussions between representatives of regional governments to reinvigorate the Luanda and Nairobi processes, and we underline that a political solution to the conflict remains essential. The United Kingdom strongly condemns attacks on humanitarian workers, including a recent attack in Butembo which killed 2 aid workers working for the British NGO Tear Fund. Targeting humanitarian actors is unjustifiable. We recall the inviolability of civilian camps, and we express our serious concern about civilian lives being endangered by the positioning of heavy artillery near IDP camps. We are also deeply concerned by attacks on areas known to be heavily populated by civilians, and we deplore ongoing reports of sexual and gender-based violence. Second, the United Kingdom continues to call for MONUSCO's transition to be responsible and carefully considered, to ensure that the DRC authorities are in a position to assume responsibilities and avoid a security vacuum. We encourage MONUSCO to implement lessons learned from its withdrawal from South Kivu, as it looks ahead to subsequent phases of disengagement from North Kivu and Ituri, where conditions for civilians are already dire. We further encourage MONUSCO and the DRC government to collaborate closely on a strategy for the protection of civilians that focuses on strong political and community engagement. Third, the United Kingdom takes note of the Secretary-General's letter on options for potential support for the SADC Regional Force, SAMI DRC. It's important that any support does not impede MONUSCO's ability to deliver its current mandate. This is a dangerous moment for MONUSCO and its peacekeeping personnel. MONUSCO must avoid being drawn into an escalating regional conflict. President, this is why any support to SAMI DRC should be both anchored in the Luanda and Nairobi political processes and implemented in accordance with the UN human rights due diligence policy. Continual review against these criteria will be critical to any support we give. Thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Соединенного Королевства за его заявление. И сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Сьерра-Леоне.
Thank you, President. I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the members of the A3+, namely Algeria, Guyana, Mozambique, and my own country, Sierra Leone. We thank Ms. Bintou Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary General in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Head of the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission, for a comprehensive briefing. We take note of the report of the Secretary General for the period 20 March to 19th June. The A3+ recognizes the critical work the United Nations is carried out in an extremely fragile, complex environment and other difficult circumstances. We express our support for the work of MONUSCO and calls on concerned parties to cease all attacks against the mission. We seize this opportunity to congratulate His Excellency President Felix Tshisekedi and his government on the appointment of the first female Prime Minister, as well as the appointment of 17 women in the cabinet. We convey our best wishes to the government and people of the DRC. We welcome the participation of the representative of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda in this meeting. President, the people of the DRC have suffered a prolonged misery. For 3 decades. Eastern DRC has been a battleground for a conflict with deep and tangled roots. We are alarmed about the deteriorating security situation in the Kivus and Ituri, and are especially concerned about the protection of civilian risk posed by this problem. Violence linked to armed group activities, including the M23, ADF, FDLR, and CODECO, continue to inflict a heavy toll on civilians, including women and children. We are concerned about the risks posed to civilians in IDP camps and call on all parties to ensure the protection of civilians in keeping with the provisions of international law, including international humanitarian law. We condemn all attacks, including bombings of displaced camps. We are gravely concerned about attacks on critical infrastructure, including the Goma airport, and attacks on MONUSCO peacekeepers and assets. The people of the DRC have suffered for long, and it's high time the conflict be resolved. Regrettably, however, there are no signs of improvement since the Security Council last met on this file. The Congolese people must no longer continue to suffer the atrocities of the armed groups in the DRC. In light of the situation on the ground, the A3+ would like to make the following points. First, we strongly condemn the resurgence in fighting, in particular around the Kayamboyanga in North Kivu province. If the fighting persists, there is a risk of regional spillover in the Great Lakes region with devastating consequences. The trials the Congolese people go through and the trauma caused by the M23, ADF, CODECO, FDLR, and other groups are unacceptable. We call on all armed groups operating in the Eastern DRC to cease their attacks on civilians and withdraw from occupied territories, and give civilians, including internally displaced persons, the much-needed respite they deserve. The principles of international humanitarian law must be respected by all parties. Second, We reiterate our support for regional talks and processes. We applaud the effort of His Excellency João Lourenço, President of Angola, for his relentless effort in keeping the Luanda process alive and for working towards peace and stability in the DRC. In this same vein, efforts in complementing the Luanda and Nairobi processes with the aim of energizing political dialogue at the regional level and de-escalate tension should be supported. We call on all stakeholders to renew their commitment to the success of these processes. Additionally, we are supportive of the African Union Peace and Security Council communique endorsing the deployment of SAMI DRC and echo the calls of the Southern Africa Development Community and the government of DRC for UN support to SAMI DRC in line with Resolution 2717. The A3 Plus has also taken note of MINUSCO's withdrawal from South Kivu in line with the comprehensive disengagement plan. We continue to urge respect for the wishes of the Congolese people, while at the same time stressing the importance of a responsible, gradual, and sustainable withdrawal. We look forward to receiving the proposal for the next steps of the withdrawal. In this context, we thank the Secretary General for its proposed options for UN support to SAMI DRC. Members of the A3 Plus are considering these options thoroughly and are prepared to engage with fellow Council members to chart the best path forward in keeping with the interests of the Congolese government and people who have borne the brunt of the conflict for decades. We stress that the unity of Council members is a moral imperative in order to ensure SAMI DRC receives the support it needs for peace and stability in the DRC. Third, we need to address the alarming humanitarian situation in Eastern DRC, particularly through the provision of adequate funding. Living conditions in displaced persons camp are already deteriorating, with the DRC categorized as having one of the worst displacement crises in the world. Continued armed group activities, including the offensive by M23, will only continue to exacerbate the humanitarian consequences for the more than 6 million people that have been displaced from their homes and communities. Women and children are suffering the brunt of the deteriorating humanitarian situation, and we continue to pay the highest price in this conflict if nothing is done to bring the conflict to an end. We have seen, for example, the continued grave violations against children and the additional cases of sexual exploitation and abuse recorded during the reporting period. The A3 Plus urges full accountability for these violations. Equally important is the timely delivery of humanitarian assistance. However, delivery of humanitarian aid requires protection of humanitarian convoys and personnel in line with international humanitarian law. Parties to the conflict must show restraint and adhere to their obligations and refrain from targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. We must respond in a timely manner to the urgent humanitarian needs of displaced persons and ensure they have access to basic services. Finally, the recruitment of children into armed groups does not only violate international law and instruments, such as the Convention on the Right of the Child and the Optional Protocol on the Involvement of Children in Armed Conflict, but also perpetuates cycles of violence and exploitation of children. It is essential for all parties involved, including state actors, armed groups, and other stakeholders, to be held accountable for their actions and to face justice for their role in recruiting and using children in conflict. By upholding accountability and addressing the root causes of child recruitment, the DRC can move towards a more just and sustainable future for its children and community. In conclusion, President, members of the A3 Plus urge the international community, in particular the Security Council, to pursue a comprehensive approach in tackling the root causes of the Congolese conflict. We urge all actors to respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Democratic Republic of Congo and condemn all such violations, including any illegal mining of its natural resources. We are committed to supporting the government of the DRC and its people. Achieving peace and stability in DRC and the wider Great Lake region is of high importance to the African continent. I thank you.
Я благодарю
I
постоянного
thank the
представителя
permanent
Сьерра-Леоне
representative of
за его
Sierra Leone for
заявление
his statement,
и предоставляю
and I now
слово
give the floor
представителю
to the
Соединенных Штатов.
representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Thank you, SRSG Keita, for your briefing today and for your steady leadership of MONUSCO. We also welcome the representatives of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda today. The United States strongly commends all parties to the conflict in eastern DRC for committing to a 2-week humanitarian truce that began July 5th. We thank Angola for its partnership in reaching this truce and will cooperate with them to monitor and verify it. We also thank MONUSCO for its support to this overall effort. These regional diplomatic efforts are the way to achieve permanent solutions and a lasting peace for the long-suffering communities of eastern DRC. The United States further commends MONUSCO for safely completing its drawdown from South Kivu in line with its mandate and the joint disengagement plan agreed by the DRC government and the UN. We extend our gratitude to the UN personnel who have served in South Kivu and offered protection and support to its inhabitants over the last 20 years. With Phase 1 of the disengagement complete, we are troubled by the impact on civilian protection and humanitarian access. We are also concerned that DRC security forces have struggled to effectively deploy into and maintain the positions MONUSCO occupied. We urge the UN and the government of the DRC to anticipate and address these challenges in future phases of MONUSCO's disengagement to avoid consequences for civilians, such as the consequences we have seen in South Kivu. We are appalled by the surging number and lethality of attacks by the armed group Codeco in Ituri province. In addition, the ISIS-affiliated Allied Democratic Forces killed more civilians in June 2024 than in any previous month. These despicable acts of violence would undoubtedly have been more grave without MONUSCO's interventions, further underlining the significant contributions MONUSCO continues to make to security and the protection of civilians in these provinces. Amid such instability and violence, and recognizing the crucial role MONUSCO plays in defending population centers and facilitating humanitarian access, this Council should not, in good conscience, support MONUSCO's departure from North Kivu or Ituri until more progress is made to de-escalate the ongoing conflict. Colleagues, we were outraged by threats and obstructions by M23 and the Congo River Alliance against MONUSCO positions, supply routes, and movements in North Kivu. It is irresponsible for Rwanda, as a major troop-contributing country to UN peacekeeping, to tolerate such behavior by M23. We reiterate our call for Rwanda and the DRC to engage through the Luanda process to find a mutually agreeable pathway towards de-escalation. The United States stands ready to support efforts towards a resolution to the conflict. Such a resolution is critical for the security of the people of Eastern DRC, the ability of the Congolese to secure, govern, and develop the eastern provinces, and for Rwanda to ensure its internal security and focus on its role as a security exporter. Colleagues, we are alarmed by the rapid escalation of the conflict in recent months. According to credible reporting, Rwanda's military interventions and operations in North Kivu have extended beyond mere support for M23 operations to direct and decisive involvement, allowing Rwandan troops and M23 to achieve military dominance across large swaths of North Kivu and greatly increase their territorial expansion. Rwandan troops number upwards of 4,000 on DRC soil and have committed attacks that killed civilians, including the May 3rd attack on the Mugunga IDP camp, which killed dozens and wounded many more. All parties in eastern DRC must take every precaution to protect civilian populations, especially those in IDP sites, including by removing artillery and other heavy weapons in the vicinity of such locations. The more than 2.5 million people displaced by M23 and the RDF have endured untold suffering and, at a minimum, deserve physical protection from violence. Colleagues, the United States recognizes the role and sacrifices of Sami DRC in supporting the DRC government's efforts to defend its territorial integrity. The primary goal of the United States in eastern DRC is to support a de-escalation of the conflict and put an end to the instability and human suffering the conflict has caused. That is why we believe this Council should guard against steps that could further inflame regional tensions, including extending significant MONUSCO support to Sami DRC. We are concerned extensive MONUSCO support to Sami DRC may not reflect our shared interest in securing a political solution to the conflict. This is why we support the Council's authorizing only limited MONUSCO support to SADC's mission within its area of deployment, in furtherance of its mandate, without prejudice to its tasks, and within existing resources. Finally, Rwanda and the DRC must urgently take immediate steps to de-escalate, fully commit to regional diplomatic processes, and work to hold accountable all actors responsible for human rights abuses, steps which represent the only hope for peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President,
I
thank SSG Bintou Keita for her briefing. I welcome the presence of the permanent representatives of the DRC and Rwanda. Last month, the new government of the DRC was inaugurated smoothly, unveiling a new chapter in the country's governance. China welcomes this. We look forward to all parties in the country uniting as one and accelerating nation building with the government's National Action Plan as the blueprint to achieve peace and stability. In light of the SG report, I wish to stress the following 3 points. First, to push for the cessation of fighting to end violence among armed groups. In the past 3 months alone, over 500 civilians were killed by armed groups, 7.3 million forcibly displaced. On the 3rd of July, a private Chinese company located in DRC was attacked, causing several deaths and disappearances of Chinese citizens. China strongly condemns such an act, and we urge that the perpetrators be immediately arrested and held accountable by law. China urges all armed groups located in the eastern DRC to lay down weapons and withdraw from occupied areas immediately. In April, the DRC government concluded ceasefire agreements with multiple armed groups and engaged in bilateral security cooperation with Uganda and Burundi. A pilot DDR project in North Kivu was also completed. Progress such as these deserves full recognition. The international community must respect the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of the DRC, assist constructively in its efforts to maintain security and stability and improve the humanitarian situation, to promote an early settlement of the eastern DRC issue. Second, to facilitate an immediate regional de-escalation. There has been growing divergence and discord among regional countries on the issue of eastern DRC. In its report, the Secretary-General expressed his concern over the risk of regionalization of the conflict in the eastern DRC. China calls on countries concerned to remain calm and exercise restraint, to settle differences through dialogue rather than military means. We commend Angola for facilitating the meeting of foreign ministers of the DRC and Rwanda last March. We encourage regional countries and organizations to play a bigger part in advancing the Luanda and Nairobi processes. We hope SSG Kita can maintain coordination with Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, Xia Huang, to continue to work for peace and promote peace talks. Third, to move forward MONUSCO's drawdown process in an orderly way. The mission has successfully withdrawn from South Kivu last month. Going forward, the UN system should assist peace-building and consolidation efforts in South Kivu. MONUSCO needs to stay engaged with the DRC government to ensure a safe and orderly drawdown process. A string of recent attacks against MONUSCO calls for a greater sense of urgency and more effective measures by the relevant actors to ensure the safety of peacekeepers. SADC is engaged in peacekeeping activities in the eastern provinces. We support reasonable adjustment of MONUSCO's mandate to ensure its coordination and complementarity with regional forces. We are ready to participate constructively in the Council's deliberations on supporting regional forces. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I thank and appreciate SRG Keita for your briefing today and also for your dedicated work. We fully support MONUSCO and commend the troop and police contributing countries. And I welcome representatives of Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda to today's meeting. Since our last meeting, the security and humanitarian situation in eastern DRC has deteriorated considerably. We are deeply troubled by escalating violence, including intensified confrontations involving M23, FDLR, and Wazalendo, as well as deadly attacks by Codeco, ADF, Zaire, and other armed groups. The unprecedented territorial expansion of M23, the expansion of ADF, and the significant increase of civilian casualties are alarming. We urge M23 and all other armed groups to immediately cease hostilities and withdraw from occupied territories. We welcome the announced 2-week humanitarian truce and urge all parties to fully respect and implement it. I would like to highlight 3 points. First, we remind all parties of their obligation to respect international humanitarian and human rights law. The conflict has led to appalling levels of sexual violence, including in and around internally displaced person sites, recruitment and use of children, and other grave violations against them. We strongly condemn over 170 attacks on aid workers this year alone, as well as continued attacks on peacekeepers. The escalating use of heavy artillery near IDP camps is alarming, and we condemn it. Accountability for those endangering civilians with these reckless tactics must be ensured. We furthermore call for accountability for sexual violence, sexual exploitation, and sexual slavery that disproportionately affects displaced women and girls. All states must end any support to armed groups. We are alarmed by external support to M23 and unauthorized foreign military personnel in DRC. Sovereignty and territorial integrity are basic principles of international law, and they must be respected. We urge Rwanda to fully and immediately withdraw its military from DRC. There is concern about reports indicating that despite directives to prohibit cooperation with FDLR, some elements of armed forces of DRC continue to engage with FDLR. We again urge all parties to end support to all armed groups. Second, we note the completion of MONUSCO's withdrawal from South Kivu, marking the end of the first phase of its disengagement from the country. Given the escalating security situation, the continued withdrawal of MONUSCO requires careful and strategic planning. A safe, responsible, gradual, and sustainable withdrawal remains essential, focusing on the ongoing and strong partnership between the DRC government and the UN, including the Security Council, as well as regional partners. There is ongoing concern about the possible impact of the withdrawal on the protection of civilians, especially in light of massive displacement. We recall that the primary responsibility for the protection of civilians lies with the government. In regions where civilians, including IDPs, depend on MONUSCO protection against armed groups, coordinating the deployment of Congolese security forces with the mission's withdrawal is vital. Third, we are deeply concerned about the conflict escalating into a wider regional crisis, as highlighted by the Secretary General in his report. SRG Keito warned just now that there is a real risk of regional conflict. We support regional efforts to promote peace and stability. We commend President Lorenzo of Angola for revitalizing the Luanda process and facilitating recent diplomatic engagements with DRC and Rwanda. And we urge President Tshisekedi and Kagame to engage in inclusive political dialogue. We note the near-completed deployment of the South African Deployment Community Mission, SAMI-DRC, and stress the importance of effective coordination between MONUSCO and regional forces for protecting civilians and peacekeepers. We also note the Secretary General's letter of June 28 outlining options for possible support to regional forces. Any support must strictly comply with the UN Human Rights Due Diligence Policy and the African Union Compliance Framework. Madam President, in conclusion, there is one clear and united message coming from this chamber repeatedly, that there is no military solution to this conflict, and we urge all involved parties to heed this message from the Council loud and clear. Slovenia remains steadfast in supporting efforts to end the conflict. We will continue to support peace initiatives and regional cooperation to ensure sustainable resolution. Thank you.
Я благодарю постоянного представителя Словении за его заявление и предоставляю слово постоянному представителю Мальты.
Thank you, President. I also thank SRG Keita for her updates and welcome the representatives of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda to the Chamber. This Council recently adopted a press statement that expresses strong condemnation of foreign military support to the M23 and any other armed group operating in the DRC. We demanded the cessation of such support, reaffirming the DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We also condemned attacks conducted by the ADF, all attacks against MONUSCO, and the unacceptable threats exerted by the M23 against the mission. Malta strongly reaffirms these messages today. We welcome the final report as issued by the group of experts. Their work remains valuable to identify the complex dynamics in the region, including the responsibilities of armed groups and national states. As MONUSCO has completed its withdrawal from South Kivu, security spillovers from the North Kivu are affecting the south. 500,000 IDPs recently moved to South Kivu to escape the brutality of war in the north. We are concerned that Twiraneho operatives in South Kivu are committing grave violations against children with persistent recruitment, also in collaboration with the M23. We encourage the Congolese authorities to spare no efforts in ensuring a sufficient military presence in the region and to prevent bases from falling into the hands of armed groups. We take note of the Secretary General's letter proposing options for MONUSCO support to SAMI-DRC. Malta recalls that any logistical and operational support should be consistent with OP20 of Resolution 2717. We recall that any such support should be in strict compliance with the UN Human Rights Due Diligence Policy, and we stress the importance of protection of civilians, close coordination, and information sharing. On the political front, we echo the Secretary General in condemning the events of 19th May, namely the attempts to destabilize the democratic institutions in the DRC. Those responsible for such acts must be held accountable. On a positive note, Malta welcomes the appointment of a first female Prime Minister, along with 17 women, to form part of government. This marks a milestone in promoting the meaningful participation of women in leadership positions and hope it serves as a model for others. President, I take this opportunity to commend Angola for its efforts to de-escalate regional tensions and conflicts. We hope that the leaders of the countries concerned return to the negotiating table. Many root causes of conflict still need to be addressed. It remains an international responsibility to ensure that illegally extracted mineral resources from the Eastern DRC are not integrated into the international market. We are concerned that Rubaya, the region from where half the coltan national production originates, is now under M23 control. Information indicates that production continues at high levels, while miners and local traders are being forced to sell the ore to M23-linked traders. Meanwhile, an unabated humanitarian catastrophe continues to unfold in the eastern DRC. We condemn the attacks against the Monunga camp on 3rd May, as IDPs are daily confronted by the risks of open conflict. We welcome the announcement of a 2-week humanitarian truce and hope it will bring relief to communities caught in the conflict. We demand that all violations of international humanitarian law and violations and abuses of human rights end immediately. These include gender-based violence and sexual violence in conflict recruitment, use and abduction of children, and attacks against schools and hospitals. Malta continues to advocate for a more significant presence of child protection advisors in South Kivu in line with Resolution 2717. I thank you.
Я благодарю постоянного представителя Мальты за ее заявление и
предоставляю
слово постоянному представителю Республики Корея.
Permanent representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank SRSG Ms. Bintu Keita for her informative briefing. I also welcome the representatives of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda to today's meeting. At the outset, the Republic of Korea reiterates the Security Council press statement on the DRC issued on June 20th. Through the press statement, the Council condemned attacks in eastern DRC, expressed concern about their impact, called for diplomatic dialogue towards de-escalation, and reaffirmed its commitment to DRC's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. In this connection, we welcome the 2-week humanitarian truce between the parties to the conflict in eastern DRC, which began last Friday. Korea sincerely hopes that this truce prevents the risk of an imminent, fully fledged regionalization and escalation of the conflict, and serves as a beginning for a lasting, peaceful, and sustainable solution to the protracted conflict in the region. Against this backdrop, I'd like to underline 4 points. First, the territorial expansion of armed groups are deeply alarming, and Korea strongly condemns and urges the M23 to fully withdraw from all occupied areas and adhere to the Rwanda roadmap. Continued attacks and the proliferation of weapons on displacement sites that led to attacks early May on the Lakfer and Muganga IDP camps is equally distressing. Recent reports of the DRC group of experts about direct foreign military interventions on DRC territory also raise serious concerns. Foreign military support to armed groups not only intensifies regionalization of the conflict, but also destabilizes the security of the supporting country itself, and therefore must cease immediately. The Security Council should continue to be vigilant on this matter. Second, we welcome the timely withdrawal of MONUSCO from South Kivu and commend the efforts of the UN country team to tailor its support along this transition process. Long-term stability requires relevant peace-building efforts, which is well demonstrated in the South Kivu transition roadmap, including protection of civilians and security, strengthening state authority, and support to the DDR program. In this regard, we very much welcome the development of a new program for social cohesion and community violence reduction in South Kivu by the UNFPA, which will be supported by the Peace Building Fund. Korea has nearly doubled its contribution to $8 million to the Peace Building Fund this year and will continue to support its activities. At the same time, given the intensifying conflict in North Kivu and its spillover into South Kivu, preserving MONUSCO's achievement is crucial. Future disengagement plans should be examined prudently for a gradual, responsible, and sustainable withdrawal of MONUSCO while consolidating the overall transition. Third, we take note of the Secretary General's letter to the Security Council presenting options for MONUSCO and the UN support to regional forces in the DRC. Regional peace processes are crucial for de-escalation and peaceful conflict resolution. Regional forces, such as SAMI DRC, deployed in connection with these regional processes could serve as a tool to create a conducive environment for a political solution. However, any such UN support to regional forces should strictly comply with the UN human rights due diligence policy. Regional forces should also ensure the highest standards of conduct, discipline, and transparency under a robust compliance framework. Fourth, the dire human rights and humanitarian situation demands urgent attention. The DRC faces one of the world's largest displacement crises, with over 7.3 million people displaced. Human rights abuses, including ethnic reprisals and increasing grave violations against children and gender-based violence, which are reverting to their worst levels, only brings more suffering to the innocent civilians. We urge all parties to adhere to international humanitarian and human rights law and ensure unimpeded humanitarian access. Korea plans to make a significant contribution to this year to address the DRC's humanitarian funding gap. In closing, Madam President, the Republic of Korea reiterates its unwavering support for SRSG Keita, MONUSCO, and the regional organizations in their efforts to bring lasting peace and stability to the DRC. I thank you.
Я благодарю постоянного представителя Республики Корея за его выступление и предоставляю слово представителю Японии.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to express my gratitude to SRSG Keita for her briefing. I welcome the participation of the representative from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. The attacks in May against the presidential palace and the residence of the former DRC Vice Prime Minister for Economy in Kinshasa have given us grave concern. We strongly condemn these acts, and the assailants must be made accountable. We are also worried about the continuous incidents causing number of victims, especially on East DRC. The horrifying incident of shelling against IDP camps in the same month is another consequence of the continued heavy fighting between M23, the armed forces of the DRC, and other armed groups. We strongly condemn such attacks. The victims, including women and children, are in the most vulnerable condition, having fled human rights violations and abuse to gain shelter at the camp. The increased offensive by armed groups, including M23, is devastating the lives of local people and threatening human security. They must immediately cease hostilities and lay down their arms. In this context, Japan welcomes recently reached 2 weeks truce agreement. We sincerely hope this will be fully implemented. The shelling incident by M23 again shows the presence of heavy weaponry in close proximity to the civilian population. Crossfire in the vicinity makes humanitarian access to IDP camps impossible, and those in need face increased risk of abuse, including sexual violence. Actions must be taken to prevent another case involving civilian casualties. We reiterate the utmost importance of respecting human rights and upholding applicable obligations under international humanitarian law. The reported large quantities of sophisticated artillery brought from outside and presence of disguised foreign troops remain deeply concerning. Ongoing support of any kind by any states to M23 and any other armed groups must be stopped immediately. Continuation of such support is bringing the region to the verge of all-out conflict. It is essential to preserve the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. We continue to support ongoing national and regional initiatives to overcome differences, alleviating tensions among stakeholders, and seek sustainable solutions through inclusive dialogue. The government-led agreement to cease hostilities between several armed groups in Italy should be reinforced by security and confidence-building measures, including implementation of the disarmament, demobilization, community recovery, and stabilization program. Angola has been playing a commendable role in the mediation between Rwanda and the DRC. The Luanda process needs to be observed by all parties in a sincere manner, and we call for avoiding any actions that risks derailing it. SAMI DRC has been trying to help build a conducive environment for the implementation of regional initiatives. Any possible assistance to SAMI DRC by the UN should be provided in strict compliance with the UN human rights due diligence policy as stressed in the SG letter on possible options. We have received a joint report on the first phase of MONUSCO's disengagement. A further gradual, responsible, and sustainable withdrawal requires a synchronized deployment of the adequate national security forces to ensure protection of civilians. We continue to encourage the DRC to promote its nationally owned security sector reform with necessary budgetary measures under the leadership of the newly formed government. Japan continues to support the government's efforts to develop community policing through capacity and institution building for promoting the rule of law. Japan will continue working together with all partners for sustainable peace and stability in the region. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Японии за ее заявление и предоставляю слово постоянному представителю Швейцарии.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Bintou Keita, for her briefing and for including the touching poem by
tout
young
travail
people.
Accompli par la MONUSCO.
And I also commend all the work
Et je
accomplished
salue
by
la
MONUSCO.
présence
I welcome
des
the
représentants de la
presence of the
RDC et du
representatives of the
Rwanda à
DRC
cette
and Rwanda
réunion.
at this meeting.
Je félicite également
I
la
also
RDC
congratulate
comme
the
mes
DRC
collègues
as
pour
my
la
colleagues
formation
have
de son
done
nouveau
on the
gouvernement,
formation
y
of its new
compris
government,
la
including the
nomination de la
appointment
première femme
of
première
the
ministre
country's
du
first
pays.
female prime minister.
Alors que le désengagement
Now
de
that
la MONUSCO
MONUSCO's
du Sud
disengagement
Kivu
from
s'est
South
achevé
Kivu
et
has
que
been
les
completed
conditions
and
sécuritaires dans
security
l'Est
conditions
restent
in the East
instables,
remain
la RDC se
unstable,
trouve à un
the
carrefour
DRC
décisif
is at a
pour le
decisive
rétablissement
crossroads
durable de la paix
for the
sur
lasting
son
restoration
territoire.
of peace on its
Afin
territory.
d'apaiser les
In order to
tensions
ease
et d'assurer la
tensions
protection des
and
civils,
ensure the protection of
trois
civilians,
aspects
three
nous semblent
aspects
particulièrement
are
importants.
particularly important in our
Premièrement,
view. First,
seule une solution
only
politique
a
fondée sur
political
le dialogue
solution
et
based
le
on
respect
dialogue and
mutuel
mutual
peut
respect
conduire à une paix et
can
une
lead to
sécurité durable
lasting
dans la région.
peace and security in the
Comme
region.
mentionné aujourd'hui par la
As mentioned
représentante
today by the
spéciale,
special representative,
l'intensification des tensions entre
the
la RDC et
intensification
le
of tensions
Rwanda
between the
représente
DRC
un
and
risque
Rwanda
réel
represents a
d'escalade
real risk
régionale
of
et
regional
d'aggravation du
escalation
conflit.
and a worsening
Dans
of
ce
the
cadre,
conflict.
nous
In this
saluons les
context,
initiatives politiques en
we
cours
welcome the
et
political
encourageons les
initiatives
présidents
underway and
Tshisekedi et
encourage
Kagame
Presidents
à se
Tshisekedi
réunir au
and
plus
Kagame
vite
to meet as
pour
soon as
engager un
possible
dialogue sincère et
to
constructif.
engage in a sincere and
Nous saluons
constructive
les efforts
dialogue.
des États-Unis
We welcome the efforts of the
ayant
United
mené à une
States,
trêve
which have
humanitaire
led
dans l'Est
to a humanitarian
et
truce in
espérons
the
que celle-ci
East,
débouchera sur un
and hope that
cessez-le-feu
this will lead
permanent.
to a permanent ceasefire.
Par ailleurs, Pour rétablir la confiance, il est crucial que tous les États de la région respectent leurs engagements. À cet égard, la progression continue des forces de défense rwandaises et du M23 dans l'est de la RPDC, notamment la récente occupation de plusieurs localités du territoire de Lubero, est inacceptable. Cette avancée constitue une violation de la souveraineté et de l'intégrité territoriale de la RDC. Nous appelons instamment le Rwanda à cesser tout soutien au M23 et à se retirer du territoire congolais. De même, nous appelons les FARDC à tenir leurs engagements et cesser leur soutien au FDLR. Deuxièmement, aucun dialogue de paix durable ne pourra aboutir si les partis continuent à violer le droit international. La Suisse reste préoccupée par l'augmentation des attaques contre les civils, des recrutements d'enfants et des violences sexuelles liées au conflit dans toutes les zones affectées par le conflit. Les partis doivent prendre des mesures concrètes pour protéger la population civile. Conformément au droit international humanitaire, les partis doivent notamment éviter de placer des objets militaires à l'intérieur ou à proximité de zones fortement peuplées. Les civils et les sites de déplacés ne doivent jamais être pris pour cible. De plus, nous condamnons sans équivoque tous les attaques contre la MONUSCO et contre le personnel humanitaire. En effet, les parties au conflit ont l'obligation de respecter et de protéger le personnel humanitaire et onusien, y compris le personnel local, comme le rappelle la résolution 2730 de ce Conseil, adoptée au mois de mai à l'initiative de mon pays. Et troisièmement, alors que la MONUSCO a achevé son retrait du Sud-Kivu, nous sommes préoccupés par les défis sécuritaires qui perdurent après le désengagement. La Suisse encourage la RDC à prendre le relais et à veiller à ce que les vides sécuritaires soient comblés, notamment par le déploiement des forces de sécurité. Par ailleurs, il est essentiel que ces défis en matière de protection soient pris en compte lors des prochaines étapes du désengagement. Enfin, tout soutien de la MONUSCO aux forces régionales devrait être entrepris en gardant à l'esprit que la paix et la sécurité ne peuvent être atteintes que par des solutions politiques durables. Il doit être conditionné à une application robuste du principe de diligence voulu en matière de droits de l'homme et un soutien pour assurer l'adhésion au cadre de conformité de l'Union africaine, conformément à la résolution 2717. D'un point de vue opérationnel, tout soutien doit s'accompagner d'une approche centrée sur la protection des civils et d'une coordination et d'un partage d'informations solides. Madame la Présidente, la Suisse continue de s'engager en faveur d'une solution politique à la crise dans l'Est de la RDC. Nous réaffirmons notre disponibilité à soutenir les efforts diplomatiques et les discussions de paix. Nous appelons les membres de ce Conseil à parler d'une seule voix pour que ces efforts se concrétisent et mènent à une désescalade du conflit.
To a de-escalation of the conflict. I thank you.
Я благодарю постоянного представителя Швейцарии за ее заявление. И сейчас я сделаю заявление в качестве представителя Российской Федерации. Благодарим спецпредставителя Генсекретаря госпожу Бинту Кейту за брифинг. Приветствуем участие в заседании постоянных представителей ДР Конго и Руанды. Глубоко озабочены эскалацией ситуации на востоке ДР Конго в связи с возобновлением наступления вооруженных группировки М-23, а также активизацией на этом фоне деятельности других МВФ. Вынуждены повторить, что продолжение военного конфликта в Северном Киву – ключевая причина деградации гуманитарного положения. Число внутренне перемещенных лиц в ДРК уже приближается к 7,5 миллионам человек. Использование и размещение тяжелых вооружений рядом с гражданскими объектами привело к росту страданий мирного населения, существенному увеличению числа убитых и раненых. Обстрелы населенных пунктов и лагерей внутренне перемещенных лиц должны прекратиться. Серьезную озабоченность у нас также вызывает использование в районе боестолкновений продвинутых систем вооружений. Необходимо предотвратить дальнейшую деградацию обстановки, чреватую серьезными последствиями для всего региона Великих озер. Проблемы на востоке ДР Конго имеют глубинный характер, требуют взвешенных и долгосрочных ответов, учитывающих коренные интересы всех вовлеченных сторон. Убеждены, что только политические решения приведут к созданию условий для устойчивой стабилизации. Призываем к прекращению боевых действий и полноценному выполнению договоренностей в рамках луандийского процесса. Этому должна способствовать интенсификация региональных дипломатических усилий и посредничества между Киншасой и Кигали. Очевидно, что успех на этом треке удастся обеспечить только при условии прекращения государственного взаимодействия с незаконными вооруженными формированиями. Мы часто слышим в Совете Безопасности о том, что какой-либо конфликт становится забытым по причине эскалации в других регионах мира. Кризис в Демократической Республике Конго – один из старейших, с кровопролитнейшей историей и беспрецедентными жертвами. К сожалению, предпринимаемые дипломатические усилия имеют ограниченные результаты. Призываем страны, имеющие политические и экономические интересы в регионе и влияние на основных протагонистов, поставить интересы населения ДРК на первое место. Внешнее деструктивное вмешательство в дела ДРК недопустимо. Уверены также в том, что многое зависит от эффективности действий Киншасы по стабилизации страны,
effective efforts to stabilize the country, to strengthen the accountability of the security sector and state control throughout all regions, as well as efforts to resolve intercommunal conflicts by launching an inclusive interethnic dialogue.
Поддерживаем деятельность МОНС, ДРК и ее руководства. Присутствие миссии в зоне конфликта важный стабилизирующий фактор. Понимаем при этом естественные исторические и политические ограничители для ее работы. Призываем скорейшим образом и в самой беспристрастной манере извлечь уроки из ее успехов и неудач. Безоговорочно осуждаем нападения и насильственные действия в отношении голубых касок. Отмечаем завершение вывода МОНС ДРК из Южного Киву. Это чрезвычайно важный рубеж для миссии и многолетних миротворческих усилий в ДР-Конго под эгидой ООН. Опыт, полученный в рамках осуществления этой фазы, должны стать хорошим подспорьем для следующих этапов. При определении дальнейших шагов по организации вывода МОНС ДРК с территории страны важно учитывать эволюцию ситуации на земле, действовать гибко, поэтапно и ответственно. Нельзя допустить возникновения вакуума безопасности. Одновременно необходимо сохранить приверженность реализации принципиальных решений, принятых Советом Безопасности ООН. Приветствуем практическую поддержку, которую сообщество развития Юга Африки оказывает Киншасе для преодоления кризиса. Важно обеспечить необходимый уровень координации с МОНС ДРК, определить эффективные модальности совместной работы. Благодарим секретариат ООН за подготовку предложений по параметрам возможного содействия региональным силам со стороны миссии. Призываем коллег рассмотреть вариант расширенной поддержки контингенту САДC в рамках общерегиональных усилий по стабилизации ситуации. Россия в качестве постоянного члена Совета Безопасности продолжит содействовать регулированию кризиса на востоке ДР-Конго. Поддерживаем независимость, суверенитет и территориальную целостность этой страны. Я благодарю за внимание. Я вновь приступаю к исполнению обязанностей председателя Совета. Сейчас я предоставляю слово постоянному представителю Демократической Республики Конго.
Madame la Présidente, c'est un honneur de prendre la parole devant le Conseil sous votre présidence. Je tiens à féliciter votre délégation pour la compétence avec laquelle vous dirigez les travaux du Conseil. Je remercie également le représentant permanent de la République de Corée pour sa présidence efficace le mois passé. Je souhaite exprimer notre gratitude au secrétaire général, M. Antonio Guterres, et à Mme Bintou Keïta, sa représentante spéciale the Special Representative, for their tireless efforts in favor of peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and their active involvement in the negotiated withdrawal of MONUSCO, the first phase of which was completed with success. We would like to pay tribute to the soldiers of peace for their devotion and their sacrifices in the service of the ideals of the United Nations. We are grateful to the member states of SADC for their solidarity manifested by the deployment of the regional force SAMI-DRC in support of the Congolese Armed Forces and MONUSCO, and we honor the memory of soldiers of the SAMI-DRC who have fallen on the field of honor. Their sacrifice will not be in vain. Lastly, we would like to hail the initiative of the United States that has led to a humanitarian truce, offering a respite to the civilian populations bearing the full brunt of the Rwanda aggression. Madam President, your Council is examining the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations mission for the stabilization of the DRC and the letter on the support options for the SADC Regional Force SAMI-DRC as presented this morning by the Special Representative of the Secretary General on the DRC. The joint report DRC-MONUSCO on the first phase of the disengagement of MONUSCO, including the roadmap for disengagement in South Kivu and the support plan of the United Nations for the support for the transition in Sud Kivu must also be taken into account. Allow me to outline the approach of my government regarding the support of the United Nations for the Southern African Mission to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, SAMI-DRC, and the disengagement of MONUSCO before discussing the report of the Secretary General on the situation in the DRC. Madam President, with regard to the support for SAMI-DRC, it's important to underscore that in conformity with the mandate granted by your Council to the Secretary General, my government wrote to the Secretary General on the 13th of April of 2023 in support of the letter of the SADC to request the support of the United Nations for SAMI-DRC. This support includes aviation resources, land transport, infrastructure, refurbishment of installations of MONUSCO during its withdrawal, and financial resources to complement the budget of the SAMI-DRC for the acquisition of drones and strategic air transport, as well as platforms for the collection of information and intelligence. It's important to recall that this request for logistical support and cooperation between MONUSCO and regional forces, in particular those of SADC, is nothing new. Thanks to this kind of cooperation, at the request of our government, MONUSCO had established a rapid intervention brigade, which was successful in defeating the M23, which had been supported by Rwanda in 2012. Read the correspondence of the Secretary General, document S/2024/519 of the 28th of June of 2024, proposing 3 support options for the SAMI-DRC force, and we're grateful to him. On this point, for lack of a better option, my government is in favor of option 2, which proposes the limited use of logistical means and military capacities of MONUSCO in the hope that these measures will enable the SAMI-DRC to cover the needs of its logistical and operational mandate. And my delegation here would like to appeal to the conscience of the members of the Security Council to demonstrate realism and to take into account the devastating statistics of the crisis in the east of the DRC, which has lasted almost 3 decades, with a human death toll of several millions and a disastrous humanitarian situation of over 7.2 million IDPs. Madam President, as far as the disengagement of MONUSCO, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo endorses the disengagement note co-signed on the 21st of November 2023 with MONUSCO at the request of the Security Council for an accelerated, progressive, orderly, and responsible withdrawal of the mission from the DRC. The note, validated by Resolution 2717 on the 19th of December of 2023 by the Security Council,
Council envisions the departure of MONUSCO in 3 phases. My delegation hails the completion of the first phase on the 25th of June 2024 during a ceremony presided by the Prime Minister, Madame Judith Suminwa, with the departure of MONUSCO from South Kivu and the closing of its offices, bases, and facilities of the mission in that province. This disengagement was made possible thanks to the cooperation between the government and MONUSCO in spite of certain logistical and security challenges. The 2 other phases concern respectively the North Kivu for second phase and Ituri for phase number 3. For the time being, the priority of the government is to consolidate and strengthen the authority of the state in South Kivu to prevent any kind of security vacuum. Based on the roadmap of the integrated provincial transition team. So, we are currently in a period of transition during which the government will fully take over the activities formerly exercised by MONUSCO with the support of the agency's funds and programs of the United Nations. These activities are budgeted within the provincial roadmap. Its implementation should begin on the 1st of July of this year. However, due to the continued aggression of Rwanda in North Kivu, the next withdrawal phase, phase 2, will begin when the conditions allow for it after the necessary joint assessment. Madam President, the report of the Secretary General is fixated on the attacks of the RDF and M23 against IDP camps, as well as their territorial and military expansion and escalation. This is mentioned in paragraphs 91 and 92 of the report of the Secretary General. As demonstrated also by the recent violent clashes around the city of Kanyabayonga in the territory of Lubero in the province of North Kivu. This is the logical continuation of the facts reported by the group of experts of the United Nations, which affirms that in its recent conclusions of its report on the DRC, that 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers of the Rwandan Defense Forces are currently operating on territories of Nyarongo, Rutshuru, and Masisi.
These troops belong to various RDF divisions, including the 2nd and 3rd divisions,
par le général de division Eugène Kubito et les forces spéciales des RDF commandées par le lieutenant-colonel Augustin Riarassa Migabo. Ceci est renseigné dans les paragraphes 42 et 43 du rapport du groupe d'experts. Le groupe d'experts a documenté le déploiement de technologies et d'équipements militaires avancés par le RDF, y compris des lance-roquettes de 122 mm, des bombes, des mortiers et des conteneurs de missiles anti-chars. Vous lirez cela au paragraphe 46 du rapport du groupe d'experts. Pourtant, peu avant de prendre connaissance de ce rapport, mon gouvernement avait attiré l'attention du Conseil sur l'aggravation de la situation sécuritaire et humanitaire caractérisée, notamment par les bombardements de camps de déplacés de guerre à l'est de la RDC, qui ont causé un nombre élevé de victimes, en majorité de femmes et des enfants. C'est notamment le cas des bombardements aveugles et délibérés perpétrés par les troupes de l'armée rwandaise et leurs supplétifs du M23, respectivement en date du 2 février 2024 contre le camp de déplacés de Nzale et de la tragédie vécue le 3 mai 2024 par les populations congolaises vivant dans les camps de déplacés de guerre de Mugunga au Nord Kivu. Ces attaques ont été suffisamment documentées et portées à la connaissance du Conseil de sécurité à maintes reprises, aussi bien par mon gouvernement que par les rapports successifs du groupe d'experts de l'ONU sur la situation sécuritaire en RDC. Mon gouvernement a même demandé, par sa lettre du 8 mai 2024 au Conseil de sécurité, de convoquer une
2024
réunion publique
to
à cet
convene an
effet
open meeting
et
to this
d'exiger du
end
Rwanda
and to
le retrait sans
demand
condition de ses
that
troupes
Rwanda
du territoire
unconditionally
de la
withdraw its
RDC
troops from
ainsi que la
DRC
cessation de tout
territory
soutien
and
au
cease
M23
all
sous peine de sanctions
support for
individuelles
the
et collectives.
M23 or else face
Bien que
individual and collective
régulièrement saisi de
sanctions.
cette demande,
Although regularly
le Conseil
informed of
est
this
demeuré
request, the
silencieux
Council remains
du début
silent
à la fin du mois de mai
from the beginning
2024
all the way to the end of May
pour
2024
des raisons qui
for
échappent encore
reasons
à l'entendement de ma
that
délégation.
my delegation
Ce
still
silence
fails
a
to
malheureusement
understand.
contribué
This
à
silence
encourager le Rwanda
has
et
unfortunately
ses supplétifs du
contributed to
M23 à
encouraging Rwanda
poursuivre
and its
son entreprise
M23
de
proxies to
déstabilisation
continue
de la République
their
démocratique du Congo
destabilization
et
of
de
the
la région des Grands
DRC
Lacs,
and the Great Lakes
aggravant
region,
une situation humanitaire déjà
aggravating
chaotique.
an already chaotic
À ce
humanitarian
propos, on peut
situation.
lire au paragraphe 34
In this
du rapport
regard, paragraph
du
34 of the
secrétaire
Secretary
général
General's
que
report
l'épidémie de choléra, de
states that
rougeole et
the
de
cholera,
variole
measles,
a
and
continué
smallpox
d'aggraver une
epidemics
situation
have
humanitaire
further
déjà complexe.
aggravated an already complex
Mon
humanitarian
gouvernement reste
situation.
néanmoins confirme
Nevertheless, my
que le
government
Conseil
remains
saisira la
confident
présente
that the
opportunité
Council will
pour
seize this
prendre des
present
mesures
opportunity to take
appropriées face à la
appropriate
dure épreuve
measures
que
in response to
subissent
the
nos
hardships
concitoyens
endured by our
contraints à
citizens
l'errance perpétuelle
who
forcée.
have been forced into
Madame
perpetual
la Présidente,
displacement.
parce
Madam
qu'il n'est
President,
jamais trop tard pour mieux faire,
because it is never
ma
too late to
délégation
do
vous
better,
invite à
my
faire
delegation
avec elle
invites you
les constats ci-après. 1.
to join us in making the following
Les
observations.
attaques si haut
First,
décriées, telles que
the
dénoncées
aforementioned
par le
attacks,
secrétaire général des
which have been
Nations Unies,
denounced by the
les
Secretary
groupes
General
d'experts
of
des
the
Nations
United
Unies
Nations, the
et
group
mon
of
gouvernement
experts of the United Nations, and my
une
government
énième violation
constitute
flagrante
yet another
de
flagrant
l'intégrité
violation
territoriale
of
de la
the
République
territorial
démocratique du
integrity
Congo,
of the
de sa
DRC, as
souveraineté
well as
et de
its
son
sovereignty
indépendance
and
politique,
political
ainsi que
independence.
de la feuille de route
They are
de
also a
Luanda.
flagrant violation of the
2.
Rwanda roadmap.
Le déploiement
Secondly,
des soldats rwandais
the
sur le
deployment of
territoire
Rwandan soldiers
congolais
on
sans
the
invitation
territory of the
ni
DRC without
consentement de l'État
invitation
congolais,
or consent
ainsi que l'alliance du
from
Rwanda
the
avec le
Congolese
groupe
state,
terroriste
as well as
du
Rwanda's
M23
alliance with the
pour
M23
déstabiliser mon
terrorist
pays
group with the purpose
constituent
of
des graves
destabilizing my
violations
country,
de la Charte
constitute
des
grave
Nations Unies,
violations of the
de
Charter of the
l'acte
United Nations,
constitutif de
the
l'Union
Constitutive
africaine,
Act of the African
ainsi que de
Union,
la résolution
as well as
3314
Resolution 3314
29 de l'Assemblée
29
générale
of
des
the
Nations Unies
United
du
Nations
14
General
décembre
Assembly of December
1974.
14, 1974.
Cette résolution
That
définit
resolution
l'acte d'agression
defines
comme l'emploi de la force
the act of
armée
aggression
par
as
un
the
État
use of armed force by
contre
a
la
state
souveraineté,
against
l'intégrité
sovereignty,
territoriale
territorial
ou
integrity,
l'indépendance politique
or
d'un
political
autre État
independence of
ou de
another
toute
state,
autre manière incompatible
or in
avec la
any
Charte
other
des
manner
Nations Unies.
inconsistent with the Charter of the United
3.
Nations.
Il semble
Third,
que le
it
Rwanda
appears
est garanti
that Rwanda
de
has been
l'impunité
guaranteed
et
impunity
bénéficie d'un blanc-seing
and enjoys
grâce à sa
a blank check
participation
thanks to its
aux opérations de
participation
maintien de paix des Nations
in UN
Unies
peacekeeping
comme l'un des
operations
pays contributeurs de
as
troupes
one of the troop
et
contributing
renforcée par la
countries. And
bienveillance
this is further
du
strengthened
Conseil de
by
sécurité à son
the
égard.
Security Council's benevolence
Depuis
towards it.
2022,
Since
les forces
2022,
rwandaises et le M23
Rwandan
ont
forces and the
attaqué à plusieurs
M23
reprises
have
des
repeatedly
positions de la
attacked
MONUSCO et de la SAMI-RDC,
and SAMI
ainsi
DRC
que des
positions,
hélicoptères,
as well
entraînant la
as
mort de quelques
helicopters,
casques
resulting in
bleus,
the death of
y
several
compris des soldats de la
peacekeepers,
paix, originaires de certains États
including
membres du Conseil.
peacekeepers from some of the Council's
Ces
member
attaques
states.
constituent
These
des
attacks
crimes de guerre.
constitute war crimes.
Le Conseil de sécurité doit
The Security
agir,
Council must take
car
action
les autorités rwandaises ne respectent
because
aucun
Rwandan
engagement pris,
authorities are not respecting
déstabilisent
any
l'État
of the
congolais
commitments that they have
et
made. They are
défient les organisations
destabilizing
internationales
the
et
Congolese state
régionales,
and defying
lançant
international
même
and regional
dans les médias
organizations.
internationaux
They have even
un
made a
appel
public
public
appeal
au
in the
soutien au
international media
M23,
for
un
support
groupe
for the
armé terroriste
M23,
made in Rwanda,
made in
pour tuer les
Rwanda armed
Congolais
terrorist
et
group
renverser l'ordre institutionnel
in order to
de
kill
la
Congolese
RDC
citizens and
sans
overthrow
que
the
le Conseil de
institutional
sécurité
order
ne
of the
branche.
DRC without the Security
Il
Council so
faut
much as
reconnaître,
flinching.
Madame la Présidente,
It must be recognized, Madam
que la
President,
cessation des hostilités
that
et la désescalade tant
the
souhaitée
much desired
ne
cessation
seront
of
pas
hostility and
possibles tant
de-escalation
que le
will not not be possible as long as Rwanda and its M23 allies continue to fan the flames of the conflict, and as long as Rwandan leaders fail to respect their commitments under the Luanda process.
La République démocratique du Congo
Democratic
défendra
Republic
son
of the Congo
intégrité
will defend its territorial
sa
integrity,
souveraineté et sa
its
sécurité,
sovereignty,
la sécurité de ses
and
populations
the
à tout
security
prix,
of its
tout en
people
restant
at all
ouverte
costs, while
à un règlement
remaining
politique
open
du
to a
conflit avec
political
le
settlement
Rwanda
of the conflict
par la
with
voie
Rwanda
diplomatique.
through diplomatic
Cependant,
channels. However, that path will only be credible if Rwandan troops effectively withdraw from Congolese territory in order to allow for frank and constructive dialogue.
Mon gouvernement appelle donc le
My
Conseil de
government
sécurité,
therefore calls on the Security Council,
garant de la paix et de la sécurité internationale, à prendre pleinement conscience du
to
danger
become fully
que
cognizant of the
représente le
danger
comportement
posed
actuel
by
des
the
autorités
current conduct
rwandaises
of the Rwandan
et assumer
authorities,
sa responsabilité
and to assume its
en adoptant toutes
responsibility
les mesures
by
préventives
adopting
nécessaires
all the necessary
pour mettre
preventive
fin
measures
à une
to put
détérioration
an end
continue
to the
de cette
continuing
situation qui menace
deterioration
toute
of
la
this
région.
situation, which threatens the
Compte
entire
tenu
sub-region.
de ce qui précède
In view
et
of
afin de
the
contribuer
above,
à
and in
une
order to
solution
contribute
durable
to
de la
a
crise
lasting
sécuritaire
solution to the
dans l'est
security
de notre
crisis
pays
in the east of our
par la voie
country
diplomatique
through diplomatic
et de
means,
favoriser la paix et la stabilité
and in
dans la
order to
région des Grands
promote
Lacs.
peace and stability in the Great
Le
Lakes
gouvernement de
region,
la République
the
démocratique
government
du
of the
Congo
Democratic Republic of the
demande au
Congo
Conseil de sécurité
requests the Security Council to do the
demander au
following.
secrétaire général et à la
Requests the
MONUSCO
Secretary General and
d'accorder
MONUSCO
un soutien logistique et
to
opérationnel
provide
substantiel à la
substantial
SAMI
logistical and
RDC
operational
afin
support
de
to
lui
SAMI
permettre de s'acquitter du
DRC
mandat
in order to
que
enable
lui ont
it to fulfill the
confié les chefs
mandate
d'État
entrusted
et
to
de
it
gouvernement
by
de
the
la SADC.
SADC heads of state and government.
Définir un régime de sanctions
Define
applicable
a
au
sanctions regime
Rwanda
applicable
et à ses
to
dirigeants.
Rwanda and its leaders.
Sanctionner l'État rwandais,
Sanction the
ses
Rwandan
dirigeants
state, its
et toute
leaders,
personne morale ou
and
physique
all legal
impliquée dans
entities
cette
or
agression.
individuals involved in this
Les
aggression,
crimes de guerre,
war
les
crimes,
crimes contre
crimes
l'humanité
against
et les
humanity,
violations graves des droits de l'homme
and serious
commises
human rights
par le
violations
RDF et
committed
le
by
M23
the
sur le
RDF
territoire
and the
congolais.
M23 on Congolese territory.
Exiger officiellement
Officially
le retrait sans
demand
condition
the
des troupes
unconditional
rwandaises
withdrawal
de
of
la
Rwandan
RDC
troops from the
sous peine de
DRC,
sanctions
or
individuelles
else
et
face
collectives.
individual and collective sanctions.
Suspendre toute participation des
Suspend
troupes du Rwanda
all
aux opérations
participation
de
by
paix des
Rwandan
Nations
troops
Unies
in UN peace
et décréter
operations,
un embargo sur les
and
armes
declare
contre
an
lui
arms embargo
jusqu'à l'arrêt de
against
son
it
soutien au
until
M23
it ceases
et
its
au
support
retrait
for the
total de son armée du
M23
territoire
and fully
de la
withdraws its
République
army from the
démocratique du Congo.
territory of the DRC.
Enfin,
And
dénoncer et sanctionner
denounce
l'implication
and
des autorités
sanction
rwandaises
the Rwandan
dans
authorities' involvement
l'exploitation
in
illégale
the
des
illegal
ressources naturelles
exploitation
minières
of the
et agricoles de
DRC's
la République démocratique
natural
du
mining
Congo.
and
Je vous
agricultural
remercie.
resources. I thank you.
Я благодарю постоянного
I thank the
представителя
permanent
Демократической Республики
representative
Конго
of
за его
the
заявление,
DRC for
и
his
сейчас
statement, and I
предоставляю
now give
слово
the floor
постоянному
to the
представителю
permanent
Руанды.
representative of Rwanda.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor. Let me also take this opportunity to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council this month. I also thank SRSG Bintu Keita for the briefing, as well as member states for their statements. Madam President, before delving more into the content of the report, allow me to provide some historical context to this Council on the root causes of the current crisis in Eastern DRC. The presence in the DRC of communities of Rwandan origin speaking Kinyarwanda, which is our national language, dates back to before colonial rule. After decades of divide and rule policies coupled with the stigmatization of these communities, who were considered as aliens by both post-independence authorities and the colonial ruler, there has been various attempts at denying these people their fundamental rights of citizenship, safety, and protection. This complex situation was aggravated in 1994 when the Eastern DRC saw a massive influx of people crossing the border, among which were the perpetrators of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Congolese Tutsi were persecuted and were forced out of their homes. They are now refugees living across the region with only one wish: returning to their homes in a safe and dignified manner. Madam President, given this historical context of the conflict and its root causes, it is striking to see that neither a military solution nor the scapegoating of Rwanda will provide a lasting solution to this crisis. In 2013, an attempt to end this conflict by way of arms did not hold for long, leaving us to deal with the same issues over again. One cannot repeat the same process expecting different results. The security and governance failures of the DRC led to the mushrooming of illegal armed groups, we count more than 250 armed groups. Chief among them is the FDLR, but we count also the Islamic State-linked ADF, various Mai and ethnically charged violent band of thugs, all roaming across Eastern DRC and causing havoc and mayhem. Despite numerous initiatives to resolve this situation, the lack of political will by DRC authorities to resolve the underlying root causes of the conflict brought us to the concerning security and humanitarian situation we witness today. In addition, Madam President, this midterm report highlights the importance of ownership by all parties in the peace process. So far, the international community and the DRC has failed to comprehensively ensure the protection of Congolese citizens, especially Congolese Tutsi populations who are being ethnically cleansed by armed groups, part of the coalition that MONUSCO supports. The report also highlights incidents that targeted innocent civilians. Rwanda takes this opportunity to reiterate its firm condemnation of the recorded attacks, including those against IDP camps, who were put at great risk by the presence of heavy weaponry in the vicinity of the camps, as documented by international organizations like Doctors Without Borders. Rwanda condemns with the same strength the attacks that claim the lives of UN peacekeepers. Such events are of grave concern. Madam President, I wish to clarify that Rwanda has never been opposed to any multilateral forces in Eastern DRC. On the contrary, Rwanda supported the East African Community Regional Forces efforts. However, it is important to recall that these efforts were undermined by the DRC government as they were not seen as offensive enough, despite having achieved great results, including the withdrawal of M23 by more than 70% and the ceasefire between the warring parties. In an effort to secure a more offensive force, the DRC government called upon SADC countries to intervene. In light of this, it is easy to agree that SAMI DRC is far from being neutral. In fact, it has even coalesced with ethnically charged illegal armed groups like the FDLR, acting under the guise of FARDC. It is well known that FARDC operates and is embedded with FDLR and provides military, financial, and other support. This support to the FDLR poses a great threat to Rwanda's security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. FDLR is a threat to Rwanda and the Great Lakes region at large in its renewed capacity to cause harm, thanks to the support it receives from DRC's highest authorities, which even vowed to cause regime change in Rwanda. FDLR also causes a great threat to regional stability because of its dangerous genocidal ideology, a cancer which has taken deep roots within the Congolese population. This results in the current ethnic cleansing and hate speech against Congolese Tutsi that the UN Special Advisor for Genocide Prevention, member states here are present, and many other observers have called out. This must be taken seriously. In view of these facts, Madam President, Council members, it is concerning that the UN Security Council would consider supporting such a force under Resolution 2717 of 2023. Rwanda appeals that the UN thoroughly examined the SAMI DRC and to verify whether the support that is being requested is in line with UN human rights due diligence policies. This has been mentioned several times in this Council. It is the duty of this Council to ensure that member states' contributions do not end up in the hands of illegal armed groups, let alone a UN-sanctioned terror group like FDLR. I therefore call for this Council to reconsider becoming enablers of genocidal forces and be tainted by association with their crimes. As you know, Council members, FDLR has committed heinous crimes across the DRC. So any support to any force that is embedded with FDLR would be tainting the UN and its actions. Madam President, I wish to conclude by expressing once again Rwanda's support for regional initiatives, especially the Nairobi and Rwanda peace processes. Rwanda strongly appeals to the international community to support these regional efforts, which focus on political solutions, including the need for political dialogue and the need to permanently address the issues of the FDLR by disarming, demobilizing, and repatriating them to Rwanda. I thank you for your kind attention.
Я благодарю постоянного представителя Руанды за его заявление. Постоянный представитель ДРК попросил слова для дополнительного заявления. Предоставляю ему слово.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je dois m'excuser d'avoir à demander une fois de plus la parole, mais il faudra que les contre-vérités soient dénoncées, que ça ne puisse pas prendre les devants devant ce Conseil qui est un organe très respectable de la communauté internationale. Madame la Présidente, l'argument tiré de la persécution des populations rwandophones en République démocratique du Congo est un argument fallacieux. Parce que la République démocratique du Congo est bordée par 9
DRC is bordered by 9 countries.
Et les populations de ces 9 pays se retrouvent à l'intérieur de la République démocratique du Congo.
Populations of these countries
forment en fait la République démocratique du Congo.
Within the borders of the DRC, which in fact forms the DRC. We have on our territory Angolans, people from Gabon, from Central African Republic, from South Sudan. We have
des Rwandais,
nous avons des Burundais, nous avons des Zambiens.
Tous les pays limitrophes au nombre de 9 ont leurs ressortissants en République démocratique du Congo.
Bordering us have nationals living in our territory, living in peace with our territory. So it is absurd to believe that we would only persecute the Rwandan nationals. There would be no reason for us to do this.
Les causes profondes des conflits, nous en avons déjà
parlé.
The
root causes of the conflict, we explained it already
lorsque le génocide a eu lieu.
Starting in 1994, when the genocide occurred in Rwanda between Rwandans.
Les Hutus, qui est une majorité de la population du Rwanda,
which is a majority of the population in Rwanda,
été accueillis par la République démocratique du Congo à la suite d'une opération militaire qui avait été autorisée par les Nations Unies. Ils se sont réfugiés à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo. Ils constituaient, selon le Rwanda, une menace à cette époque-là. La République démocratique du Congo a même accepté de mener des opérations conjointes avec l'armée rwandaise pour justement s'attaquer aux FDLR pour que le Rwanda ne dise pas qu'il constitue une menace. Aujourd'hui, les rapports des organisations internationales établissent que c'est une force résiduelle qui ne représente rien. Et je l'ai dit ici devant ce Conseil. Le Rwanda a déjà déclaré que les FDLR ne constituent pas une menace à sa sécurité. Pourquoi il continue à dire la même chose? Et enfin, Madame la Présidente, en ce qui concerne justement le soutien à Samir Dessé, nous pensons que c'est tout à fait normal que nous puissions demander ce soutien et que la SADC puisse intervenir parce que nous avons sur le territoire de notre pays un pays envahisseur. Et ce Conseil de sécurité est un Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies qui sait qu'une intervention militaire de ce genre-là, une agression, doit être repoussée par la communauté internationale. C'est tout ce que nous demandons. Nous demandons tout simplement au Rwanda de rentrer chez lui pour que nous restions des voisins et pour que nous puissions discuter. Tant qu'ils sont sur le territoire congolais, la discussion sera difficile. Voilà,
Я благодарю постоянного представителя Демократической Республики Конго за его заявление. Список ораторов исчерпан. Сейчас я приглашаю членов Совета продолжить обсуждение данного вопроса в рамках неофициальных консультаций. Заседание объявляется закрытым.